Thank you everyone for joining. I am Suzanne. I'm the program coordinator for Our Water, Our World, and I'm here to talk about retaining the rain in partnership with the Solano Stormwater Alliance. We have some special guests with us today. Our agenda is I will be going through slides for a solid hour. I'm going to be providing a lot of content. I'm going to provide an introduction to our program partners, and then I'm going to dive into the benefits of rainwater retention for our gardens and the environment. I'll talk about systems for rain collection and how to set those up, why and how to install a rain garden, and considerations for pervious surfaces, and then additional resources. So a lot to cover. We have Emily here today. So Emily, if you would like to take a moment to introduce yourself and the Solano Stormwater Alliance.
Great. Thanks, Suzanne. And thanks everyone for joining today. My name is Emily Corwin. I'm a senior engineer at the Fairfield-Sassoon Sewer District, and I manage the Solano Stormwater Alliance. And this is a collaboration of the cities of Fairfield, Sassoon City, City of Vallejo, and the Vallejo Flood and Wastewater District. And we're all united and working together to prevent pollution from draining into our environment and down to the San Francisco Bay, particularly. So part of that is being good stewards of our homes and our businesses and thinking creatively about how to capture rain, which Suzanne is going to talk about more today. So looking forward to the program. Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you, Emily. And then we also have Elise from the Solano County Water Agency. If you'd like to provide us with a little introduction.
Hi, yes, thank you so much for introducing me, Suzanne. And yes, I work with Solano County Water Agency. We're a wholesale water provider, meaning basically we provide all the water to the cities in Solano County, as well as agricultural districts and UC Davis. So part of our job is to encourage flood protection, water conservation, and water efficiency, as well as habitat restoration. So I'm here basically just kind of to tag along, and we do also encourage water conservation programming. So thank you so much. We do a little bit of everything, some public outreach, educational programming, working with students of K through 12 about water education. And really what Suzanne's going to talk about will tie into some of the programs that we offer. So we do offer rebates if anyone is interested and so inspired after listening to the talks today. So part of our program is we encourage people to either put rain barrels, rain sensors, or maybe just make their yard a little bit more water efficient, or a rain garden, which Suzanne will touch upon as well. So if you have any questions at the end of this meeting, please don't hesitate to reach out to us, and you can take a screenshot of our information right over here. And again, I'll be on this Zoom all day or all afternoon.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And then this webinar is being recorded, so you'll be able to find this recording and other programs that we've created by visiting the Fairfield Sassoon Sewer District's website, fssd.com/public outreach. So let's get started. All right. Oh, I forgot. And what the Our Water, Our World program is. Please forgive me. So Our Water, Our World is a clean water program with the goal of reducing pesticide pollutants that are toxic to our waterways. It's a partnership between water agencies and retailers that sell pesticides. Oh Wow is designed to bring awareness between pesticides and water quality, and provide pest problem solving education. So we work with retailers, we work with associates, and we work with you. You can find Our Water, Our World materials in over 200 hardware stores and nurseries throughout the state of California. In most stores, you'll find a rack like this one here, the fact sheet rack that is on the right of the screen, that will feature several pest and garden issues. Some stores will also have QR codes that will link digitally to the fact sheets. that you can scan to get the information on your phone. And then at each of the stores, you'll see these little blue tags that are called shelf talkers that we will highlight the eco-friendly products that are less toxic to the waterways. So for more information on the Our Water World program, please visit our website. So why do we care about water? We all live in a watershed. So a watershed is all of that land that drains into a single body of water. And so all that water that isn't absorbed into the ground runs straight into a storm drain and runs untreated into the nearest waterway. By passing through that storm drain, or it's going to flow directly to the seasonal creek or a marsh or the bay without getting treated, but taking with it any of the chemicals that we've used around our properties, any pet waste, litter, motor oil, and debris, whatever else is out there in the environment. So we really want to be aware of our urban runoff and keep water on site as much as possible. Thus the inspiration for this program, because retaining the rain and keeping water on site is the solution. So during times of drought or periods of excessive heat, or during times of not getting a lot of rain or snow during the winter, it can be really challenging to keep our gardens happy and healthy. So I'm going to share how retaining the rain is one solution. And when we can hold on to that rainwater, this assists with our goal to grow resilient gardens here in Solano County. All right, there are so many benefits. Keeping rainwater on site instead of letting it run off into the storm drain not only prevents pollution from getting into our creeks and wetlands and the bay, but also benefits our homes and gardens, preventing flooding, runoff, and pollutants that could get swept away with that runoff. Holding onto the rainwater replenishes water in the soil and recharges the soil deeper down, recharging that groundwater. When we can capture rainwater, we reduce the need for using the municipal water source to irrigate our landscapes, which is especially important and saves us money. In today's webinar, I will cover some simple practices for retaining the rain. We won't have a lot of time for detailed instructions, but I will share helpful resources so you can learn more. And we'll also have ample time at the end for your questions. So let's compare what happens let's compare what happens in vegetated areas versus urban areas. So in nature, approximately 50% of that rainwater soaks into the soil, whereas in developed urban areas, it's just about 15%, so much less. So how deep the water can be absorbed into the ground is really also very important. So that deep infiltration is really going to be as valuable as the shallow infiltration. In this illustration, we see that 25% of the rainwater in the vegetative area is available to plant roots, to recharging creeks, and so forth, while the remaining 25% of that water sinks in deeper. That's that deep infiltration that is going to reach lower lying aquifers and recharge the groundwater. In urban areas, there is less pervious surfaces, mostly impervious. And so with more rainwater runoff, instead of it soaking into the soil or into the natural ground, it actually is just going into those storm drains that go out to our local waterways. In this illustration, it shows that 55% of that rainwater will be run off. So what happens to that 55% of rainwater when it becomes runoff? It goes into our storm drains, but along the way to the storm drains, it picks up pollutants from the street and sidewalks, such as the pesticide, residuals from pesticides and other chemicals, litter, motor oil, and other objects. And the pollutants end up in our creeks, wetlands that eventually get to the bay because there's no treatment or filtration systems that that this water will go through. And when the storm drains are blocked by leaves or litter, or when we have significant downpours, like our atmospheric rivers that we happen to experience more often now, this significance will overwhelm the storm drain systems, and then we start to see flooding. Or a king tide. Boy, king tides sure impact the storm drains as well. So also understand that water is a powerful source that can displace soil and cause foundation and structural damage. So even if rainwater stays on our property, it can lead to eroding foundations if not directed properly, as shown in this photo. So let's look at how we can retain the rain, keeping the rainwater on site and hold on to it. So let's dive in. So one way to reduce runoff, and this might be one of the easiest ways for us all to, tackle right now, is to increase to help the soil absorb more water. And we do this by increasing the infiltration and the water retention of that soil. And we can add compost to the soil, uh, the compost by adding compost to the soil, or top dressing with the mulch, but nice 2 to 3 inch layer of mulch is also going to help with this. Compost turns our soil into a sponge, really helping that water stay a little longer. Mending our soil, which is 5% of compost, quadruples that soil's water holding capacity, which is quite impressive. Then covering that soil with 2 to 3 inches of mulch significantly reduces the water evaporation rate, locking in that moisture and feeding the soil as those plants break down. That mulch also insulates the soil and reduces erosion. So I like to call the compost and the mulch, when we utilize these tools, our drought insurance. They're tools for drought insurance. And the next way we can, the next way I like to talk about retaining water on site is with rain catchment systems. So rain catchment systems can be large or small, high tech or very, very simple, and they can be used for different purposes. So some will capture valuable rainwater runoff from your roof so that you can use it over the course of the winter to keep your spongy soil hydrated. And some systems are meant to store that water so that we can then use it during the drier summer months. Benefits of rainwater catchment is that it keeps relatively clean water out of the sewer system. It reduces the volume and peak flows during heavy rains that can cause flooding to combined sewer systems. So in some areas of California, we actually have a combined sewer system. And it also reduces the potable water use from non-potable applications, like watering our landscapes. No need to use potable water for that. Some catchment systems, some rainwater catchment systems can be quite large, like these cisterns here, 500 gallons or more. Their rainwater catchment systems can be placed above ground, and sometimes they can also be placed underground. They can be placed under decks or along the side of a house and so forth. But the main purpose is going to be to store water for longer periods of time. Larger tanks can be upwards to 2,000 gallons. These large systems, as I mentioned, can be narrow to fit along a fence line in more urban areas or along the sides of a house. And I think that they can be really attractive. I love this photo. This came off of the Urban Farmers website years ago. I think this is a beautiful application. And once that privet grows in, you won't even see those tanks. The smaller rain barrels that are commonly seen are typically about 50, 55, maybe 60 gallon size. These are great for storing water, but they're also good for catch and release. So during a rain event, they will fill up quickly. And then after a week or so, after we've had a little period of dry, we can then release that water to recharge that soil again. We want to take advantage of that, the soil's spongy capacity. And so we want to keep it hydrated during these winter months when we would normally be getting regular rains. These, though we can store water for long term, they're not exactly meant for long-term water storage. Few reasons: if they're not stored properly or sealed properly, we can see mildew or algae accumulating in them. And then we also can see that this small volume of water isn't really enough to water or irrigate an entire garden area. Might be ideal for seed starts or container gardening, smaller areas. And then an example of even a simpler system. This is my colleague's deck. She has an apartment. There's no external gutters from her apartment that she can access or tap into. So she simply just has some buckets and a garbage can that has actually a spigot on the bottom. And after a rain event, she fills that garbage can up, seals that lid, and then uses that water later for seed starts, potted plants, and her indoor plants. And depending on your space, multiple barrels can be linked or daisy chained together. So rainwater in this case is going to fill that first tank, and then from that downspout inlet, and then it will go down the line, filling the next and the next and the next. And there'll be a spigot, most likely at the very last tank, that you can access the water from. So this is a really great way to start where it's very economical. You can just start with one tank, and then as you need to add more tanks as you need to expand. A few considerations for deciding where you want to put your catchment system. First, you want to understand, does your roof area drain to a downspout? This is very important because this is actually how we're going to access that water, how we're going to get that water into our rain barrel or our cistern. The other thing to consider is if we have a landscape area close by to where we want to release the water. So if we have a downspout and we're capturing that rainwater, but our garden is on the other side of the property, might not be that feasible. So that's something to consider. And then something that's very important is that this is not water we're using indoor for drinking or cooking. We can use it certainly for flushing toilets or watering our houseplants, but then that's it. We want to look for our local agencies for more information on permit requirements. There's different zoning for different counties and so forth. Unincorporated versus the more urban incorporated areas. That's something to keep in mind. Something else to consider is you'll want to install the system on a flat area that's maybe on the shady side of the house or on the shady side of the fence. That would be ideal. And then you need to have, you'll need a space to direct any overflow. So when those rain barrels fill up, the rain doesn't stop. There's going to be overflows. We want to be able to drain that water either out to a drain or a rain garden or an area of the property that can handle that significant extra flow. It must be directed away from a home or any structure, including directing it away from the neighbor's property. So we want to ensure that the overflow pipe has a screen to prevent insects, birds, rodents, and other critters from entering it. And you need to secure the cistern for safety. So these barrels and cisterns get quite heavy when there's water in them. So oftentimes we want to strap them to a support wall to ensure that they don't fall over in case there's an earthquake. Some considerations to think about when choosing the size of your system is first, think about your water needs. So are you only going to use this water for maybe your raised vegetable beds, or are you going to use this to water your trees, maybe a hedgerow of shrubs, other ornamental garden areas? There's a lot to consider. Is it going to be just containers around the deck, or is it going to be the large landscape? Next, what size can you accommodate? How much space do you have to actually house these barrels or these cisterns? This is likely the most determining factor to decide what system you want. Another consideration is how much roof runoff you can capture. So how much water is actually coming off that roof will actually determine how much water we're capable of capturing. On the next slide, I'll show you an equation to figure this out. But also remember, your entire roof may not be draining to one downspout. So we might want to section off the roof to collect water in different areas. So different corners, different downspouts can be their own unique separate systems. And of course, how much rain is anticipated. So as you know, here in California, it's a little hard to anticipate how much rain we're going to get. So okay. And then I mentioned overflow. So I just want to talk a little bit about overflow. So depending on the size of your cistern or your rain barrel, you will likely have some overflow in a large storm. So you want to be able to release that water that isn't going to fit into the system out into the garden somewhere. You want to have an area that can absorb that water, an area that might be flowing into your landscape or somewhere else that isn't going to flood your foundation or cause any structural damage to your property, to your house, to a shed, to a garage, to a neighbor's property. This is all really important stuff to take in consideration. In this picture, you'll see that there's a wide overflow pipe. And when that cistern is full, that overflow pipe then gets diverted into the backyard. So that water, the overflow, is going to get diverted through that perforated drain pipe. And then it would and then they would disperse that water to an area of the garden that is slightly sloping away from the tank, slightly sloping away from the house and any other structure, so that it flows away into the garden. Keeping this in mind, it's really meant to go into the soil, into the ground, and not anywhere where it might be flooding or deteriorating structural foundation. So what size of barrel is needed? You can use this equation. This one's really simple. You can think 1 inch of rainfall over 100 square foot surface, such as the roof. We can capture 60 gallons of water. So that 60 gallons of water is enough to fill one of these 60-gallon barrels pictured here. So these are two 60-gallon barrels. Those blue barrels in the previous slide were 55 gallons. So just keep that in mind. And you might even have something as small as a 50-gallon. But let's just say we're working with a 60-gallon tank. Okay, so think about how much water we can anticipate. So we can look at the past several year, the average. So very rough average here for Solano County is our annual precipitation is about 20 inches, give or take. Could be upwards 27 inches, and it could certainly be less. But let's just say we have 10 inches of rain, that we're only getting 10 inches of rain this year. It's been a dry year. And if we just had one of these barrels, it would fill up 10 times just from a 100 square foot section of the roof. And so your roof is probably more like 500 square feet or even larger. So with that large surface area, you could capture, let's say if your roof was 500 square feet, you could capture up to 50 barrels worth of water. So that's kind of amazing. I mean, the water really accumulates. So that would really allow us to keep our soil hydrated throughout the winter rainy season, even though we weren't even getting as much rain as we normally would. I hope that makes sense. So this is a view from above, this roof line and those 3 barrels again. So you can see how the gutter sort of funnels into the pipes to go into that first tank. These tanks are then linked together. So after one fills up, then the next one will, and then the next. And you can see how the barrels will fill, first measuring the section of the first we want to measure the section of the roof that is going to flow into this gutter that will then fill up this tank system. We've determined that 1 inch of rain over 100 square foot surface can capture 60 gallons of water. This surface is 250 square feet. So we're able to capture 150 gallons of water with just 1 inch of rainfall. So that's why we have these 3 50-gallon barrels here. It's very intentional so that we can capture 150 gallons with the square footage available. I'm not going to go into the details of design and installation, but there is that follow-up, that list of resources that I provided for you in the email, and it's also in the chat. So please have a look at that. But for smaller rain barrels or containers, you can get kits that are not very expensive, that you can, build your own rain barrel yourself, DIYs. They have diverters and overflow pipes and spigots. So all you need to get is the barrel, container, or a garbage bin, something that will hold that water and that will have a lid. One of my favorite places, or one of my favorite resources, is the Urban Farmer Store. They are in Richmond. That would be the closest one. However, I know it might seem like it's kind of far to go, but they are an incredible resource. They have all of the information you would need, and they even have kits that come with the drill bit for drilling in the hole that you would need to go into that downspout or the gutter. And then for larger catchment systems, it's really best to hire a professional. And on that resource page, I've provided that information. Another important detail that I'd like to introduce you to that's going to be part of your rain barrel system or your cistern system is the first flush. So if there hasn't been rain recently, so let's say it's the beginning of the season, we're back in like maybe September or October before the first rain of the season, the roof will have debris on it, leaves and dirt. So even though we're not drinking this water, we don't want that debris in our barrel system. So it's important to install what's called a first flush device. This device diverts the first few gallons of rainwater into a separate pipe. There's a ball inside that floats up. And then when that ball reaches the top, it's actually going to plug that section. And then the rest of the water that's that's cleaner now is going to then flow to our tank. The first flush device in this illustration is on the left, comes down from the diverter. Once that is full, you'll see it, then it's going to go to the right and then into that tank. The water from that first flush device is then you can open the bottom, it's all going to come out, and then you can clean that pipe, and then it will be ready to go for the next rains. Pretty much you only need to do that at the very beginning of the season, or if there's been a lapse, like let's say we got rains in November and then we didn't get rain again until February, you'll want to clean that out as well. Something else that's really important is because we're talking about capturing water, and what loves water but mosquitoes. So we don't want to create a whole mosquito habitat, right? So it's important to keep mosquitoes out and critters and other debris out of our barrels. So for larger barrels, you can use a screen like the one on the left. It catches the dirt. So once a year, you just need to go and clean that out before the rainy season starts again. It'll also keep out mosquitoes, birds, and other critters because that screen is so thin or so fine. The holes are very, very tiny. And then for simpler barrels or the DIY projects or smaller barrel systems, we actually just want to secure that tight mesh over the top, make sure it's tightly secured to prevent dirt, mosquitoes, or other critters from getting in. And then if we are using an overflow pipe, such as in that illustration a couple slides back, we want to put a little screen on the outer end because we don't want critters crawling in. So that's something else to keep in mind. And then just a quick note about how to access the water. It's easiest if your system is uphill or above the grade of your garden or landscape, because we really are taking advantage of the gravity. So the photo of the system on the left is a perfect example. Those two tanks are just up on a little bench. And then if we do have a larger system, we most likely are going to need to use some type of a small motorized pump that will help move that water a little faster. So again, I would encourage you to either work with a professional or to talk to the folks at the Urban Farmer Store to set you up with all of the tools and resources you need to install your system. All right, that was a lot. Rest of the program will not be as lengthy, but there's a lot to talk about with rain catchment. But this is going to be my most favorite part of the program because I love rain gardens.
Suzanne, before you move to rain
Of
gardens,
course.
can I jump in with a couple questions that came out about the rainwater harvesting? Or do you want to wait?
I would prefer to wait because there's just a lot of content and just to respect everybody's time. I don't
Cool.
want to go over that 1 o'clock.
Got
But if there's one that's really juicy that you just can't hold it back on, please share.
Keep going.
Okay, soups. Thank you, Emily. All right, so rain gardens are really very simple. They're just a landscaped area designed to receive rainwater, to receive that overflow, or to receive any water that's moving off of the roof lines, sidewalks, patios, or other paved impervious surfaces. So it's really going to help that water absorb into the ground as opposed to running off of our properties. Rain gardens designed to receive that overflow from the rain barrel and other areas of rainwater overflow. So you might notice areas of your garden where that water starts to pool up, or there's always like a little stream that starts when there's too much rain coming down. So that's really what this rain garden is going to do. It's going to help either direct a swale. A swale is a rain garden that helps move or divert water to an area where you want it, or this will help that water to flow so it's not flooding in an area that might be the walkway, for instance. Rain gardens are beautiful. They're relatively easy to install, usually very inexpensive, and they support our pollinators, our beneficial insects, and they moderate temperatures, and they also assist with carbon sequestration. So there's a lot of benefits for a very simple thing to incorporate into your garden. This is in this illustration. I think it's I love this illustration. I think it really shows exactly what a rain garden is. We're going to see that a rain garden is going to be at least 10 feet from a home or any other structure. In this illustration, we're seeing that it's taking on the overflow from the rain barrel. It could just be taking on the gutter downspout water. So maybe the rain barrel isn't even there. So just keep that in mind too. But the rain garden is just like a regular garden bed. But what makes it unique is that it has a slight depression. It is slightly depressed. It is, so you can imagine instead of like a garden berm or a garden mound, think of it in reverse. It is a very shallow basin that collects the rainwater runoff. So you'd also want to line that edge where the water is coming in with rocks or gravel, because this will prevent erosion. And then you also want to consider that the idea here with the rain garden is that we're allowing that water to come into this area where we're going to slow the flow, it's going to capture it, to slow it down. We're spreading it over an area, and then it's going to allow that water to sink in slowly. So slow it, spread it, sink it is what we want to think about. Rain gardens help restore the natural balance of our landscapes by holding back and soaking in that extra rainwater so it can get into the ground and absorb into the ground more deeply, recharging the deeper soil. And accessing the roots for our deeply rooted trees and shrubs. It's really great. Rain gardens' purpose is to hold water that's diverted to it so that water can slow its flow and soak in. I'm repeating this a couple of times. Much of that water is used by the plants, and it really helps recharge that soil much deeper down, again, for those deeply rooted trees and shrubs. A rain garden should drain within 12 to 24 hours, and definitely no longer than 2 to 3 days, because then we're looking at a problem. Because we want to, again, not create a mosquito breeding environment, and then also understand if water isn't draining well, within a few days, there's other problems that can come along that could also be detrimental to the health of your plants. But there's many ways to incorporate rain gardens into our landscapes. They're feasible for most properties, large or small, and the plants just reap the rewards. So it can be as simple as diverting that rainwater from the gutter downspout, as I mentioned, out to a rain garden. This might be the simplest for most of us. The rocks at that opening are going to help move that water or guide that water to where it needs to go without eroding that area, and just kind of helps get the flow, helps direct that water in a slower rate to where we want it to go. Rain gardens can be any shape. You want to locate and position your rain garden anywhere where there's a path of flowing rainwater, and where there's soil that you can use to allow that water to infiltrate, to really soak in. Rain gardens can be placed next to a walkway or a driveway, anywhere where we can direct the water away from those surfaces and into the soil or garden space. The rain garden in this photo is technically considered a swale, but it's still doing what we're talking about. It's moving that water along the bank of these plants, and then it's allowing that water soak in deeper. It's a good idea to include those rocks again. It doesn't have to cover the bottom, but at least at the entrance and then maybe along the edge to prevent erosion. So that's always going to be really helpful. We see rain gardens in urban environments now. This is really very common in our cities, which is really wonderful. This is the process of capturing that stormwater with these curb cutouts so that the stormwater can flow into the garden, that planted landscape area, rather than the storm drain. By integrating these bioretention gardens, contaminants and sediments are removed from the storm water runoff by filtering, by having that those sediments get filtered through the soil of these planted areas. It's so cool. A good location should be at least 10 feet from a home or a structure, as I mentioned before, at least 3 feet from a sidewalk, and 5 feet from a property line. Okay, that's really important. You also want to grade that landscape ever so slightly away from that structure, so that the water can flow away from the house or from the shed or the garage or whatever. You want to create your rain garden in an area where the soil can drain. We really want that water to sink in. So you might be thinking, oh, I've got clay. Don't worry, I've got a suggestion for that. You'll still be able to create your rain garden. But what we're going to do is we're going to check how fast that soil is draining by digging a hole, by digging an area that's fairly shallow, just about 6 inches deep and a little wide, maybe about a foot or two wide. And then we're just going to fill that with water and see how fast that water drains. If that water drains within 24 hours, that's a perfect spot for your rain garden. So how large should the rain garden be? General recommendation for a garden is approximately 4% of the contributing impervious surface area. So your soil type will affect how the rain garden should be sized due to the water infiltration of that soil. The slower the water infiltration rate, the larger or wider that garden needs to be. So if you've got clay and it's not draining very quickly, but it still drains within that 24 hours, we might want to make it a little bit shallower, maybe just 4 inches, but then we'll want to make it twice as wide so that the water can flow in, get captured, and then sink down. Next, we want to consider how much water is able to be captured from that roof or overflow. So the minimum size of our rain garden is going to be 4% of the square footage of the roof. So in our example here, I know there's a lot of math, but in our example here, if the runoff area of the section of roof that's a problem, or that seems to really dump a lot of water in our garden. Let's just say that section of roof is 20 feet by 25 feet. That's 500 square feet. 4% of 500 square feet is just 20 square feet. So the minimum size of our rain garden that we're going to build is going to be just 20 square feet. So pretty simple. It doesn't have to be that large. The maximum for this in this case would be a 10%. So minimum is 4%, the maximum would be 10%. So in our example, the minimum size of the contributing area of the roof is 500 square feet. 4% of that is going to be, the minimum size will be 20 square feet. So it's a very small area that's easy to manage. In this scale, it says 24 square feet. So again, the minimum is that 4% and it could go up to 10%. So let's just take a closer look at what a rain garden looks like when we're building it. I really like this illustration. So we're going to go down about 6 inches. Again, we're not building a pond. We want to make sure it's a little shallower. And then we're going to, um, if we have like soil that's more clay-like, less porous, then we're going to want to make sure it's a little shallower, as I mentioned, like maybe 3 to 5 inches. We want to make sure there's a gradual sloping grade on the edges, but with a fairly flat bottom. And then we want to also be very mindful that we're not building our rain garden over utilities like a gas line or electrical lines. As I mentioned, we're going to make sure we can understand how fast or how slow that water is going to drain before we get started. So we're going to do that test area. And then once we have mapped out the size and the shape, we are going to then start to dig out that soil. We're going to dig out that soil to that 6 inches. And then we're going to use that soil on the edges to make the berm. And then, so now we have this nice flat bottom. We've got this bermed edge. We're going to use some rocks at the entrance or along the sides to prevent erosion. And now we're going to take our pitchfork. We're going to take our fork that I prefer working at fork, but you can also use a shovel. And we're just going to loosen the soil on the bottom of that garden, maybe about, let's say 12 inches. So just pushing the fork in, wiggling it a little bit, pushing the fork in, wiggling it, moving it along the area, or just doing something similar with the shovel. We're then going to incorporate about 3 to 4 inches of compost on top, turning it into the top like 6 inches of the soil that we just loosened. Okay, so the bottom is going to have some nice loose amended soil with a couple inches of compost. I hope that makes sense. I feel like sometimes I start to share it a little too much. I'm not sure. Anyway, so plants for our rain garden. We're going to consider a sunny location. The sunnier, the better. We, of course, can plant in part sun, part shade, not a problem. And then we're going to choose native plants, California native California native plants are best. We want to choose flowering perennials, clump grasses, other shrubs, whatever we think is going to be beautiful for our area and for our landscape aesthetic. But choosing California natives are going to be best because they adapt to our summer dry climate and they also support our local habitat. Picking the plants, I think this is the fun part because we get to choose all these beautiful plants like the California Pacific Coast irises, California poppies, throwing in those annuals like the California poppies, those seeds in between the plants is really great because they'll grow quickly and kind of outcompete for weeds while the other plants are growing. So that's always fun and something to keep in mind. We want to try to keep the area as covered as much with plant material so it can outcompete those weeds. But when we choose those California native plants, they're going to thrive through the wet winter season as well as the summer dry season once these plants are established. Maintenance is something to consider. So this will also dictate the type of plant material that you put in and possibly the size of your rain garden. But the two takeaways that I'd really like to share is that you want to keep that rain garden working. And then you also want to keep it looking good. Okay. So the number one problem that happens is that weeds take over. So as I mentioned, the best way to prevent weeds is to outcompete, plant enough plants in the area so that the weeds don't even have a chance. They're not even able to get in there and germinate and sprout. But if we do see weeds sprouting, we want to remove them at first sight. So this might seem a little overwhelming at first, but once those plants have become more established, just trust me, you're going to see less weeds, and it will be very low maintenance once those plants become established. The next thing I'd like to share is that you want to, if any leaf debris or mulch has flowed into your rain garden because of excessive water, or sometimes that mulch gets really light and it kind of floats and then it settles. We want to make sure we're removing mulch from the base of the plants after a rain event. And then we also want to make sure any stone or cobble that is around the edge of that rain garden or at the entry of that rain garden where water's flowing in has been placed properly and any debris has been removed. And if there is any standing water for more than 3 days, then we're going to want to address that. Maybe that's not the best area. Maybe we have to increase the size of that rain garden. All right. And then there's just one last little thing to consider. For keeping water on site is that we want to consider increasing our pervious surfaces. So when we think about hardscaping around our homes and landscapes, we think about walkways, patios, driveways, and oftentimes we think of them as being made with concrete or mortared flagstone or mortared in patio stone or brick. But these materials are impervious, and and they prevent the water from soaking into the ground, and they ultimately contribute to that runoff and flooding that we're trying to avoid. So pervious surfaces like pervious pavement, gravel, dried laid pavers, or brick, anything that's maybe dry laid on gravel or sand or other material, that water is going to flow through it. And it will help keep that water on site, again, recharging the soil below. And keeping in mind that roots of plants don't stop just because there's a concrete walkway. They will grow under that. So it's really important that we can help those root zones stay really healthy under these surfaces. There's many types of permeable materials that are on the market. The concept is that the water, in this case, storm water from rain, or the rain water from the overflow from our roofs, just absorbs into the soil. The surfaces can be made of several types of permeable materials, such as permeable stone, these interlocking bricks. There's also permeable asphalt on the market. Even just laying down gravel is going to really be beneficial, so beneficial for the soil underneath it. It just depends on the application and the use. So if there's going to be an area that has heavy vehicles or machinery, like a driveway, cars, or like RV parking areas, you'll want to work with a contractor or an engineer to design and install these surfaces, because they'll just need a little bit more than most likely we can handle. And then for walkways, gravel or decomposed granite that hasn't been sealed with the binding material. We just have decomposed granite or gravel, or even just dried laid pavers and brick. These create clean surfaces that also allow that water to infiltrate. And these are very easy for us to handle or manage as home gardeners. And then the materials used will really depend on how we intend, what our intentions are. Do we have a family member, or are we in a wheelchair? Do we really need to have a very even, flat surface? That will really be much different. We probably don't want gravel in that case. So there's a lot of different materials. Again, if we're having to create like a parking space for some heavy machinery or a vehicle, we might need a permit. So we want to do a little research. We want to see what materials are available, what are the costs, and in some cases, we do want to hire a contractor. All right. So there, I did send you all a handout, and there is also a handout in the chat that has a list of resources that you can find online. Just a couple resources for pest management, because, sometimes pests show up in these gardens. Our Water, Our World website has a great resource of a nice list of pest management and gardening fact sheets, as I mentioned before. And then, of course, the University of California statewide IPM program is going to be just a wealth of information, a huge library and searchable database for you to find more information. And with that, I'd like to thank you. And yes, look, we've got quite a bit more time. So yes, Emily, please.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Suzanne. And I personally really appreciate the kind of practical information. So going into the detail, even of how to use your fork to loosen up the soil, is super. So thanks. And we've got a lot of great questions. So the first one that came in is about if you have any resources or you'd recommend resources to help guide the hiring for somebody to set up a rainwater system.
Yeah, I found on the Sustainable Solano website, they actually have a list of professionals, professional landscapers, professional rain catchment installers, either, through QUEL, which is the Qualified Landscape, no, Qualified Water Efficient Landscape certification, or Rescape California. So a lot of those people that work in Solano County are on that website. So there's a link on the resource page that can get you right to those professionals.
Super. Okay, great. And Elise just pasted that in
Okay, great.
a resource in the chat. So that's wonderful. If you aren't able to find that resource that Suzanne just mentioned or have another question, please follow up. And then another one here is about using barrels that are food grade for rain capture. And just making the comment that maybe they're less likely to mold or have algae growth if the water is stored for a longer period. So just curious if you have any comments or experience with food grade versus non-food grade rain barrels.
Again, yes, if it's food grade, then it probably, it's not going to have any off-gassing from plastics or it's a material that we would feel comfortable drinking that water from. However, just to be very clear, when we're storing water, the intention is to use it in the landscape, and it's not intended to be stored as potable drinking water. If we're not storing that, if the rain barrel or the rain catchment system is not, if it's located in a way that might access a little bit more heat or sunlight, then there can be the potential for algae growing. In most cases, the barrels are dark color, and that's why it's preferred to have them in the shade of the house or a fence line. So again, I think it's case by case. It always depends. Every situation is slightly different. But I think that we always want to be aware that if we are going to use this for drinking water, it has to be properly cleaned and filtered. So
yes, yeah, just to be clear, the question was more about a previously food grade barrel. I'm hoping it wasn't, yeah, to be clear, it wasn't proposing that we're drinking the captured rainwater. So
okay.
So maybe the next question I'll jump to is to rain gardens, and if you have any resources to recommend for rain garden plants.
Oh, yeah. So what we're looking for with rain garden plants, and that's why California natives are so fantastic, but we're looking for plants that can really take on a lot of water during the rainy season, and then really handle a long period. It's like 8 months almost of no rain. And of course, while those plants are becoming established, we are going to be watering them or providing irrigation because they'll need a little support in their first year or two of becoming established. And of course, if we have a dry winter, we are going to want to irrigate or supplement the water throughout those dry winter months. But it really can be any plants that you think are attractive and are really special to you that can handle wet winter, dry summer. And that's why the California natives are so appropriate for that.
Great. And it's okay to irrigate your plants that are in your rain garden in the dry season. Is that fair to say?
Yeah. Yes, especially while they're becoming established. But what we're looking for are plants that can grow independently during that dry season without water. So they'll need little to no water once established during that dry summer season.
Super. Sarah, I see your hand. Do you want to, I don't know if you have the ability to come off mute. I welcome you to jump in.
I'm going to allow her to talk. Yes, Sarah,
Okay, great.
you should be able to talk now.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi.
Okay. Hi, thank you. I just wanted to offer that Calscape is a really good resource for finding native plants because it tells you the maximum amount of water that it can use in the summer, which is, I think, more useful than just like, oh, it's low water usage. Because native plants, a lot of times you're more likely to kill them with overwatering. So you can kind of figure out which is a appropriate one that can tolerate some irrigation in the summer. And then also CalFlora is another website where you can search for native plants that are associated with different communities. And the wetland riparian plant community would be a good fit for most of those plants that, can tolerate flooding, but are also drought tolerant.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I do have those listed on our resource page also. So excellent choices.
Okay.
Absolutely love those websites because you can also choose plants by the type of birds or butterflies or pollinators you'd like to support, which is always my preferences. I always like to give those guys a little bit more support whenever possible.
Great. And just to make a pitch here, Sarah, I happen to know it's from the Solano Resource Conservation District, and they have regular native plant sales that they host. So Sarah, if you have one of those that's coming up that you want to paste in the chat and link everybody to, that'd be awesome.
We are almost about to pin down a date, so I don't quite have it yet, but
Okay.
this spring.
And next question for you, Suzanne, from the Q&A. Can a rain garden flow away from the house towards the street or sidewalk, or only be contained in the property?
Oh, yeah. The idea is that we're holding on to that water, we're stopping it from flowing offsite, and we're kind of capturing it so it can sink. So remember, it's flows in, it spreads out, and it sinks down.
Great. So the overflow from that could flow towards the street or the sidewalk, but the idea is that there's a depression there that's going to hold the water before it gets to the street or sidewalk.
Yeah, because there can be overflow at some point, but then ideally the overflow would go to another section of the garden. We would want to try to avoid flowing it into the street or a storm drain, because it could also be picking up mulch. It'd be flowing mulch or leaves with that water, which could then clog the storm drain. So that's why, sometimes we want to make multiple rain gardens. So especially if we've got that clay soil, we might need to, instead of having one, have a few, or have it long and narrow. Like I have a hedgerow of natives, and I actually have a very long, narrow rain garden or swale right in front of them, so that when it rains, it gets spread out really long, and then all that water can sink in.
Awesome. Kathy, I see your hand also. Suzanne, if you're able to bring Kathy in.
Yes.
Kathy
Hi,
Carrick.
Kathy.
Hi, I'm sorry I stepped away for a minute, but if there's a great website by the California Native Plant Society that has all kinds of resources for native plants. So if people aren't aware of that, it's fantastic. It will show you what nurseries you can buy different plants at. You can, look for plants just native to your area or native to, your region of California, but it's the California Native Plant Society website.
Awesome. Thanks, Kathy.
Yeah, and
Um,
I know that the California Native Plant Society is started this new campaign called Bloom California. And that might also be what Kathy's referring to specifically about yeah, I don't know. It's just it's an amazing website. Yeah, so thank you.
Okay, here's a good question, Suzanne. What are your thoughts on using wood chips instead of rock for the rain garden basin? Being some of the thinking that the wood chips will increase the soil organic matter and improve infiltration rates.
For to using it like as a mulch around the plants, yes, but at the point of entry where the water is flowing in, you really need to use gravel or cobble or some type of stone, like small stones, because when that water starts flowing in, it does have a lot of energy and force, and it could easily erode an edge that we've just created, the berm we've just created, that's just covered with mulch that could easily get eroded. But again, we can, every situation's different. And I think you can keep this in mind, and over time, build your rain garden in a way that captures all that water, keeps it where it needs to be without moving that mulch away.
Super. And just to note the time, we're just at 1 o'clock, a little bit over. There's probably like 4 more questions here, Suzanne. So I don't know if folks are
yeah.
able to hang on, and if we haven't answered your question yet, apologies. But hopefully we'll get to it while you're able to hear the response. So how do you prevent getting weeds in the rain garden, since there probably isn't a weed barrier that you're using?
Yeah, that it's not there. I don't think there's a way to prevent the weeds from getting in, especially when it's a young, brand new, newly planted garden. That's why filling in between the gaps between the plants that we've planted, like we put our little 1 gallons in here and there, before they've grown in, there's a lot of space. So distributing wildflower seeds, California native wildflower seeds or California poppies or similar, they will fill in those areas and outcompete for the weeds. So the weed seeds will less likely be able to anchor in and germinate. However, if weed seeds are already there, then yes, they most likely will grow, and then we just want to hand pull them at first sight. We want to avoid using herbicides, because even if it's an eco-friendly herbicide, because it can actually impact the plants that we've planted in that area. So just being really mindful and watching and hand pulling at first sight. And if we can do that, it shouldn't be that overwhelming.
Great. All right, next question. Is base rock considered a permeable surface? I use base rock. This is the Suzanne who's asked the question. She uses base rock in areas around and close to the house. Foundation is defensible space, and base rock is used as a base for cement applications.
Right. I think it's working for you. It's I'm familiar with the material. We fill in our lane that isn't really asphalt. It's kind of wannabe asphalt. So that's really the material we use. But over time, if it's getting compacted, then it won't be as permeable. So I guess it's hard for me to really say. I would like to say it kind of depends.
Yeah.
I think gravel, if you're looking for something that's going to be more permeable, then maybe gravel. But if you're looking for something that's kind of in between, that isn't going to, maybe it's going to flush water a little bit, or like allow water to move a little bit away, then maybe the base rock.
Yeah, it's a tough one. And even just getting into the kind of our regulators and thinking about, so there's a ongoing conversation about even gravel roads and how permeable they are, because of exactly that, the compaction. So I think the site specific answer, it really depends. Good one here. Are you concerned about micro or nanoplastics from barrels?
Well, there's where we get that question about the food grade
Yeah.
barrels, right? I know it's an issue. I think that boy, it's tough. The stainless steel ones are a lot more expensive, and they're more attractive, but I mean, sometimes the cost is an issue, right? We
Yeah.
do the best we can, but that's something to consider.
Yeah.
Oh, I know.
It's just a tough one.
All right. Let's see. Would wood chips be considered mulch or compost?
Yeah, good
That's
question.
good question.
Yeah, mulch is usually a covering or the top couple inches of the soil. I mean, sorry, mulch is usually what we're protecting the soil with. So compost can be mulch. And then mulch is, if we're thinking about it as wood chips or bark chips, as it decomposes, it will feed the microbes in the soil, but it's not typically called or considered compost. Compost can be mulch, but mulch is not compost, but mulch will feed that compost.
There you go. That sounds like a Venn diagram.
Okay.
So-
Okay.
Something, yeah.
Oh my gosh.
Great. I think we worked through all the questions that came in through the Q&A. I don't see any specific ones in the chat. So thanks so much, Suzanne, for your time. And just to remind folks that this recording and all of our previous webinars with Suzanne are on our sewer district website. And just, we're so grateful to have you as a resource in our community to share with us and on these types of topics. So thank you.
Thank you, everyone. I really appreciate it. Thanks, Emily. Always a treat to work with you.
Right.
Have a great afternoon.
All
Thanks
right.
everyone for joining.
Thank you.